rather exciting guests.
Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm a marketer, designer, and a thinker with a minimalist approach.
Your audio is off, Chris.
Sorry, I'm Chris. I'm a creative writer and creative strategist, and I don't know how to work my audio.
I'm Tia. I am a graphic designer, and so far I know how to work my audio, but it's dicey.
Well, I think we're all having fun with this incredible world of new media, and I'm really excited for these three guests to join us today. We'll hear a little bit more about them, their backgrounds, and their day-to-days in just a few minutes. But first, as is customary, a little bit of an introduction to the show, and that requires a bit of an introduction to Auxesys. And so Auxesys is a systems integration firm that was founded about 20 months ago, and that company was basically built on a bet. And the bet was that the future of work would include more people who had the ability to be their own boss, work from where they want, on what they want, how they want, when they want, etc. Basically a bet for increased autonomy and agency at the individual level. The other thought here at Auxesys is that while we do systems integration and technology is one of the key ways in which we help small and medium businesses, we have a much different view on systems integration. And so we see technology systems, but we also see creative systems and operational systems. And I think one of our fundamental kind of diagnoses here at Auxesys is that one of the key ways to ensure that a small business, or especially a new business, can survive, can make it to that 5-10 year mark, is to not simply think about creative or technology or operations in a siloed manner, but to think about those three areas as systems that can not only be integrated within those spheres, but can be integrated across and between. So our hope is to help our clients and partners to build creative assets and systems that make sense with their technology, and to choose and integrate technology that makes sense with their day-to-day operations, and to have day-to-day operations that motivate how our client organizations think about the creative elements of their brand. And so that brings us to, I think, today's topic a little bit. We're joined here today by three of the independent contractors that we work with at Auxesys on a regular basis. And all of them has a bit of a creative flavor to their background. And it's been very interesting to speak with them about creativity, about branding, about marketing, and especially voice from a systems perspective, as they bring a creative perspective to the table. And so without further ado, we'll pass it off to our panelists one by one to give us a little bit more information about who they are, what they do, and what their background is. So I'll turn it first to Brandon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Yeah, so as John has mentioned, I am an Auxesys IC, and I've engaged in various different projects. I've helped out with some business plan development, some design work, some blog work, and overall it's been awesome. I also do freelance work on the side, a lot of branding work and marketing work as well. And I am a student in school. I'm currently studying at the U of M and aspiring to get a marketing degree over the next 2 years.
Awesome. All right. I will. Well, hey, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your marketing degree, real quick, Brandon? What are you liking over there at school?
What am I enjoying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, what's really great is I'm starting to enter the latter portion of my degree, and I'm starting to get into more advanced classes that definitely appeal towards my skill set. I really am enjoying a lot of the different marketing classes I'm in lately, because they have a strong creative flair to them, and I'm really enjoying a lot of the group project work, because at the end of the day, a great idea doesn't necessarily just come from one person, but from a group. It takes two people to have a great idea. So I'm really hoping over the next 2 years I can keep taking these courses and keep engaging in groups and coming up with fantastic ideas.
Awesome. Hats off to you for some of your group work. I know you've been rather involved over there at the U of M.
Thank you.
It takes a lot of work and hard diligence and gusto to keep going through a lot of that stuff. So hats off. Awesome. I'll turn it next to Chris Maycher for a little bit of background and info on your day-to-day.
I work in the advertising department of a pretty big tech company in Canada. Before that, I did a lot of freelance worked also in the like action sports stuff with a pretty big e-commerce and brick and mortar store, and that was really fun. And yeah, lately I've just do a lot of focus on sort of big idea concepts for advertising. I do a lot of sort of day-to-day small execution stuff, which is always fun to write fun little headlines. But main focus lately is big idea development, working with a lot of videographers and a lot of photographers and designers to really direct big groups of deliverables to sort of one finish line.
Awesome. So I guess you've got a lot of experience with teamwork.
Yeah, creative work there's no other industry like it. I think it's working with teams is messy and it's not always nice, and sometimes it's magic, and it's just the balance of it too is hilarious. I find something.
Awesome. Well, I am interested to dive into some of the ideas there behind team and teamwork. I think it's going to be pretty central to the way we discuss today's topics. So interested to hear your take on some of these things as we dive into it. But before we do, we'll finally turn it to our third panelist and a new Auxesys. I see Tia. So Tia, if you could please tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and your day-to-day, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So I'm a graphic designer. I'm currently a freelance designer, and I've worked sort of part-time as a freelancer for many years. I have 7 years of industry experience, and mostly I've actually worked when I've had full-time graphic design jobs. I've actually worked on in-house marketing teams for larger businesses. So I've worked most recently for True North Sports and Entertainment, and working as a part of like a really larger marketing team. It has given me ability to sort of see what everybody on that team does, and oftentimes it requires me to sort of jump into different roles, which I think is just really important, has been really important for my development, especially when I go now to work as a freelancer with mostly micro businesses and entrepreneurs. It sort of gives me ability to do more than what just a graphic designer would do as part of a business. So I think these sort of two different sides of where my career has gone has given me a pretty well-rounded view of marketing in general, beyond just graphic design.
Awesome. That's really interesting to hear, and obviously probably going to be quite applicable to our conversation. Do you see yourself continuing to work in organizations into the future? Do you have a preference toward tilting towards independent work? What do you think about your career? And
I think, my preference is to work freelance, just because I really like the freedom to work with somebody who's building either a brand or who has a project in mind, and sort of do what I say, which is, wear a lot of different hats, I guess, and jump into a lot of different roles. That sometimes as part of an in-house marketing team, you get a little bit pigeonholed as you're just graphic designer, and because we've just got to get the stuff out the door, getting your voice heard as an actual marketing professional is sometimes a challenge. So that's why I do really enjoy working freelance. But at the same time, there are benefits to working. I would also welcome the opportunity to work as a contractor with some larger companies as well. I think mixing it up that way is interesting. So
cool. That's I think a great mindset to have, to expose yourself to all sorts of different ways of working. So it's very cool. I do have to just backtrack just for one moment and make a quick apology. Chris, I didn't put up your name and your title when you spoke. So okay. Now you're front and center. Maybe you could just say hey again. Sorry.
I think it's supposed to say brand or creative strategist, so we can get that out of the way.
It says creative strategist, Chris.
Creative strategist. There we go. So.
Awesome. Joining us from the beach.
It's great out here.
Awesome. All right. So without further ado, we're going to dive into some topics. Basically, the way that things work around here at Circle One is that the panel gets together usually on a Wednesday for, a quick lunch hour conversation to just talk about, what they're seeing in the marketplace, trends that they're noticing, anything that they've just been riffing on and they can't let go of that they'd like to kind of roll around for some high level conversation and see if it leads anywhere. And so, we had an interesting discussion this past Wednesday, and two things really came to the forefront. So the first topic was that we've all kind of noticed that there's some holidays around the corner. In particular, Father's Day is coming up, and all of us noticed that it seems to be difficult to market genuinely during holiday season. So whether that be Christmas or other holidays or Father's Day or Mother's Day, sometimes it feels a little off for folks like us, I believe, for folks like you guys who are creative strategists or brand marketers or graphic designers in Tia's case. You guys kind of know how the inner workings work. And for me, as someone with a video production background, it's like if a movie's not jiving and I watch that movie and I like reverse engineer how that movie in my head was made, it's like almost worse. So maybe it's like for you guys, when you see like stuff that's a little bit ungenuine or not the real McCoy, pushed into a holiday ad, maybe that extra kind of doesn't sit well with you. But I'm really curious what you guys think the reasons behind that might be, and if there might be any solutions, suggestions, or advice that you could give, especially as independent contractors who might work with some smaller businesses who might require some insight. So I'll pass this one off to Brandon as the youngest IC on the panel today, and one of our younger ICs, and a real up-and-comer who brings a lot of fresh ideas to the table on a regular basis. Brandon, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Awesome. Thanks, John. I'm going to make an educated observation, and then I'll move into a little bit of a solution. Way back when, before digital brands, there was brick and mortar stores. It was a lot. There's a big human side to these brick and mortar stores. When you walked in, you had an attachment to the person behind the counter, and everything seemed a little bit more genuine. But as brands have transitioned from brick and mortar stores to digital brands, being genuine is a lot tougher to come across, especially during Father's Day, which is something that is sentimental for all of us. Now, I guess the main question is, why is this such a challenge? And I think it is a challenge because whenever you're in a family and you're celebrating Father's Day, it's unconditional. You're just going to love your father. But when brands start to market towards you, and they tie a call to action to it, all of a sudden everything becomes very conditional. And through that, I think they just don't end up coming off as genuine. So a solution, in my eyes, and maybe Chris and Tia can expand on, a solution after, but I think when I'm going across Instagram and I'm looking at, different Father's Day content coming from users, all of a sudden it comes really genuine. So I think it would be really neat if digital brands could talk to some of their users and fans and get them to come up with the content for their brand, and then see if they can work out something that way to allow for a little bit more of a genuine sense to show through the brand.
Okay. So just to reiterate, are you saying when you scroll through Instagram or social media and you see posts from your friends or like real people who you're connected to on social media about Father's Day or Mother's Day or whatever it may be, that feels genuine to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You know what? It's when I'm looking at one of my friends end up posting about their fathers, yeah, it comes off as very, very genuine as me. But digital brands, they almost act like a person, but we know that person doesn't necessarily have a father. So when they try to post about their father, it no longer seems genuine. But when my friend posts about their father, it seems, yes, quite genuine.
That's an interesting thought.
I wonder, because you're talking about like user-generated content there. And,
yeah.
And I know that this is something that the transition from school to professional really taught me, was that user-generated content is an amazing theory. It solves a lot of problems. In reality, getting your users or your audience to supply that content in a usable fashion is just so unreliable. You can have elements of it, but you can never bank on it.
Yeah.
Right? You can use it as bonus, but you can just, it's almost impossible to bank on your user producing what you need for them. So I wonder is, you know, if you look at the contrast between brick and mortar stores and your friends, for instance, versus what a digital brand is doing today. Obviously they're coming across as more real people, but like, what is it about those people that makes them attractive? Is it that what they have to say is important, or is it that they're just interesting? And I don't know, it's a pretty open-ended question, but I think that the fact that they're interesting that's what makes people magnetic, right? So if you're in a brick and mortar store and you're dealing with a sales associate or whatever, them being an interesting person is what brings you in. You may not care about the content of what they have to say. It's actually about how they say things and how they come across that makes you really care.
And how they make you feel, maybe, right?
Yeah, it's almost like you have to be opportunistic. Like user-generated content is almost more of an opportunistic thing. Like when, you know, that's why you need someone working your social media who can react on the fly. And that's why you have to give those people like your trust in order to not have to, you know, send every like post or tweet through like a boardroom of people who are going to check it and approve it. And, you know, you almost like can't bog down your strategy with all of that, because then when someone does post about anything related to your business, or, you know, tags you in something, you have to be able to jump on those opportunities and capitalize on them, repost it, you know, engage with the person. Yeah, I do agree that, I mean, I think it's an incredibly effective way, because then it gets that person to remember, you know, it's almost like a something that was exciting that happened, you know, to them, that this business reposted what they did. And then also it does show your other customers, you know, it might encourage your other customers to do the same. But yeah, it is very hard to plan for, definitely.
So it sounds like Brandon's interested in user-generated content, and you know, I think I would back him up a bit and say that I've seen some campaigns around the holiday season that do actually strike a heartstring with me or resonate as being genuine. And then it sounds like from the other side of the table, from Chris, who's perhaps the most experienced professionally at the table, that sometimes maybe relying on that as a solution, user-generated content, can be tricky. And it sounds like Tia is also saying that perhaps user-generated content can spread you thin in terms of strategy and execution. Does that sound appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am still a fan. I do still think it's important to be engaging with the people who are engaging with your brand. I think that's still really important. But yeah, it's hard to rely on.
So there's a strategy that I've been sort of beginning to implement with some of the teams that I've been working with, and I should say we have been implementing this strategy. But because we can agree, like, the merits of user-generated content are all there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And a strategy that we've been starting to use is effectively faking it. And with the right taste and the right creative approach and the right production methods and all of that stuff and script writing, it actually can be done quite well from, I suppose, a perspective of somebody who's actually producing it. I don't know. Have any of you guys seen anything that looked user generated and you're like, wait a minute, like, it doesn't, is there, because I actually don't know, like, is there that uncanny valley from a viewer perspective?
There must be.
Like, it almost is there and you're like, oh, something is just a little bit off about this. It's not quite user generated. I personally haven't seen any, like, or at least noticed anything like that, but I'm wondering if you guys have ever seen anything that looks like that.
I for sure have. I don't know if I could mention any brands, but I follow Red Bull quite closely, and I always think Red Bull has a really interesting take. It seems like what Red Bull does is they don't necessarily just go out to their users and tell them generate content, but they seem to contact some of their fans and then tell them that they'll help them make content that they want to make. And I think that's maybe a better balance, because that way they can get a little bit more control over the situation and come up with a a little bit more of a standardized and cohesive voice. But yeah, I definitely do watch Red Bull videos sometimes and go, was that Red Bull that added that, or was that the rider or the user who added that? For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you'll see this a lot actually with companies capitalizing on already existing content creators, with the rise of YouTube and the rise of a sort of like a personality-driven marketing. I think you see this a lot where you'll watch a video from somebody who's just doing what they've done all the time, and then right at the end, it's like, oh, this was made by this company, or this was, and I actually think that there's becoming like an understanding among an understanding among like an audience that, hey, this stuff costs money, and I don't think people really begrudge these sort of mini celebrities, these like new internet celebrities, for making a buck when they're doing their content. I actually think there's sort of an understanding from people that as long as you're telling me this was sponsored, then that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think people are becoming more and more fine with that in a way that I don't know that they would have been. Like this idea of selling out that used to be, a real like death knell for, a musician or an actor. I think those lines are getting really blurred now.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Well, I think Chris brought up the Uncanny Valley, and Tia brings up, I think kind of this new category of voice that maybe we call the influencer or whatever we want to call it. And, I think we talked about one example on Wednesday, and this maybe fits into like both categories or whatever. But the Wendy's Twitter it sounds like what they've done is faked it to make it look like some silly, crass, like complete toilet mouth 19-year-old has hijacked the Twitter feed or whatever. Like some social media intern has just gotten access to the password and nobody's noticed nobody at Wendy's has noticed for ages, because it really is completely contrary to their brand of like,
yeah, it's off the wall. You don't see them talking like that in their commercials.
No, it's so wild. And I think it's super effective. Like the numbers bear out that it's obviously super effective. And I think all of us here probably look at that and reverse engineer like the movie set in our head, right? We probably see a team of writers and they realize this works, and now they're just like really going with it. But maybe that kind of example crosses the line between like the costs that I think Tia and Chris have brought to the forefront and the benefits that Brandon has brought to the forefront. And it sounds like writing in a unitary mind, or studying your user base to a certain extent, such to the degree that you feel like you can genuinely speak in their voice. Mm-hmm. Does that sound like somewhere that's getting explored more and more, or somewhere that we might, pay some dividends if we explore further?
I think right now, I mean, what Brandon brought up with Red Bull, I think is a really important example, because right now we're seeing that in a ton of facets of media, and it's the idea of the brand supporting the user to make the content. So it becomes sort of an aggregate type deal.
Yeah.
And for instance, like almost every daily show or night show has been of that fashion. The production team has come in, they've set up a video studio quality setup in this person's home, and then they've left. And this person is creating their own content on their own, but the brand is helping them achieve it on a higher level.
Yeah.
And I think if we're going back to that Uncanny Valley, there is an element of ugly that is starting to sort of really prevail and become effective, which is, I think, part of what the benefit of user generated is. But it's a fine balance, because we know that kids are playing ugly games like Minecraft, and we know that YouTube influencers with low res videos and live streams like this that are a little bit more unpolished are really taking off. And it's still, where's that level of polish where it's still a brand thing? Yeah. Brand is clearly supporting, helping it get there, but it's still owned and feels raw and feels organic.
Yeah. You know what it makes, sorry, go ahead, Tia.
Oh, sure. I will say that, like, I think Wendy's and Red Bull, like, we're pointing to these examples of people who've done it really, really well. And that's, not necessarily the norm. I mean, I do see a lot of that Uncanny Valley stuff happen. And just from, this might seem like a digression, but, I learned a lot of visual effects and illustration in school. And there's one thing that's really hard to mimic, and it's humans. And it's because we are really good at noticing when something is off. And so, we can suspend that disbelief when we're watching a television show or a movie, something that we know in the back of our minds is produced.
Yes.
But when you see somebody who's trying to act a certain way, I think we're actually pretty good at noticing when that feels off. It gives us a feeling that there's something not right there. So I don't think anybody can just pick up Twitter and master it the way the Wendy's person has done, for example. I think that's actually that's a very hard thing to do.
Do you think, Tia, maybe it also has to do with like the intent or the mode of consumption? Like when I read a book or go to a movie, it's like I want a story, I want to be entertained. Yeah. Like I can suspend my disbelief for like the most ridiculous stuff, right? And yet when I see an ad, whether it be on YouTube or in a Twitter feed or on a billboard, it's like, no, I'm not suspending disbelief for this because I haven't like already bought in, Right,
and I think people, in general, don't like to feel tricked. That's why when you did see somebody, on YouTube who talks to their fans like they're their friends, and they try to say something, that might be relatable to their fans, like a common example is these people who have millions upon millions of subscribers, and then they try to say, oh, I'm so worried about money just like you are. And it's like, wait a second, I see your big house, I see, your car that you just put on Instagram, that feels off. And I think, I think that's really like the problem. I think if they don't pretend, and if they're honest about that fact, they're like, yes, I've made some money and that's, fine. I don't think there's any backlash there. But when people try to seem one way and they're not, that's when that Uncanny Valley thing kicks in, and you don't buy it. You feel tricked,
Before we riff on that for a minute, we've mentioned this Uncanny Valley term or concept a few times. Can somebody just back this up with a little bit of an explanation? What is the Uncanny Valley?
Sure. The Uncanny Valley is, and I'm hoping I'm getting my definitions correct, but the Uncanny Valley is basically, it's a concept that when you're looking at something that is almost so real that it seems fake. So this is a common thing in visual effects, actually. We've seen this in sort of CGI when they're trying to mimic, when you go with the Pixar route and you make something that's a cartoon, we're totally fine with it and we buy it. When you try to make something look human, like really realistic, our eyes can tell that you're trying to make it perfectly real, and then we notice all the flaws. We notice the way the skin moves doesn't look right, whereas we can look at these, Pixar characters with bug eyes and be totally cool and buy into that. So it's that idea. It's that something looks so real that we notice when it's fake.
Okay. And so I think if I'm correct, the graph from the studies that from which the Uncanny Valley is derived is like, if you present people with something that is like a real human and, a cartoon or a stick figure, and this is the spectrum between realism, it's like belief or I don't know what the y-axis is. It's just like, I think it's sentiment.
Like relatability or something like that.
Yeah, it's like sentiment or like emotional, positivity or something, right? They see a stick figure, they see a crude cartoon, and it's like decently high, and then they see something that is kind of like a strange, realistic CG rendering, but like something's off about it. There's like this distrust, there's this drop, and people don't relate to it, people don't find it generates positive emotion, and then as you get back towards real humans, the relatability.
As you get closer and closer to perfect, it's a bigger and bigger drop, and then right as soon as you're at perfect, it's right back up. Like
So I think we're using this term, the Uncanny Valley, as like a metaphor, and I think what you're saying is as brand creative marketing professionals, you've all noticed that this Uncanny Valley exists in more places than just CGI and robotics and cartoons. It exists in advertising and marketing and copywriting and all these places as well. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, it's almost like those ads when they try to like set up like hidden cameras and catch people's like real feelings about a product. And of course, we all just know like just because you're shooting it on a grainy camera doesn't mean it wasn't a produced commercial.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just curious about one more thing about the Uncanny Valley. At Auxesys, we work with some research labs, and in particular, those research labs that we work with, some of them do work with robotics. We have some clients that work with robotics. We've worked with folks who do autonomous vehicles, and we've dabbled with some CGI ourselves at the firm. And so I'm familiar with that term, the Uncanny Valley, but I've never heard it spoken of like you guys are speaking of it. And you both seem to like mention it and pick, oh yeah, I know it. Like in the marketing department at your firm, have people talked about it like that? In your past work experiences with teams, do people use that term? Is that common? You guys are just brilliant metaphorologists, and you just brought it to the table. And
I'm not sure.
You're not
sure that I've heard it.
Yeah.
Not sure that I've heard it.
Well, that's interesting because as soon I think am I right? Chris mentioned it first, and all three of you knew exactly what he was talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty good metaphor for what we're talking about. Yeah.
I think what you're starting to see now too is that same curve just applied to different things. There's one where if you look at production value on one end, like really high production value and really low production value, there is a curve where at a really high production value, there's high engagement. As you start to go away from that, the engagement dips really, 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 really low until you get back down to low production value. So anywhere in the middle where you're trying to achieve one or the other, but you're not hitting the mark, the resonance level on that and like the relatability level with that content is just so good.
I think I got to agree with that from experience, and this I think relates to being genuine as well and developing a brand voice and all the rest of it. I was going to bring up the skateboard and snowboard industry, and it seems like a lot of skateboard companies and snowboard companies have done a phenomenal job at appealing in a genuine fashion to their consumers as being the real McCoy. There's one component of that, and that is I think the greatest skate and snowboard brands have all done one thing, and that is they've invested in a team. And if you're a skateboarder or snowboarder worth their salt, I don't want to buy a snowboard that doesn't support a team of unique and diverse individuals who go out there and contribute back to the sport of snowboarding in their incredibly insane and unique way. And I always remember hearing through the grapevines about certain brands that kind of faked supporting a team or dropped teams or would just interchange teams, or even some that would just run ads and just say, no, we don't have a paid team. We don't support a group of pros. And it was just like the snowboard community, the skateboard community is like, oh yeah, really? Oh, nope, next, Yeah.
Well, they're in a really interesting situation. I'm pretty familiar with that industry, and they're in a really interesting situation because at the end of the day, they sell fun. And that is just such a, it's such a good thing to play with. At the end of the day, you can't argue with that. And there are within those industries a few different classifications of brands too. There are the brands like you're talking about. There's essentially three. There's supply chain brands, there's team brands, and then there's product brands. Right. Some brands fall into both categories, but I'd say that Burton, for instance, has transitioned to be mostly a product and supply chain brand rather than a team brand. And you'll see different approaches fighting for number 1 to 5 spots on who's selling the most product and making the most revenue every season. And it does have some shifts sometimes, but it's different market segments. As an avid user of that product, as an avid snowboarder, you care about what the top level is doing. As somebody getting into the sport, I care about what price and where I can get it. So.
Yeah. Huh. And I think what I was going to also recognize was I ran a video production company, and I think I found myself in the Uncanny Valley. It's I love the raw stuff, but I wanted to try and push my production capabilities and play with cameras and editing and let it all that stuff, titles and the rest of it. And I was like, I never was Red Bull or, Travis Rice, produced media. And then I also wasn't just some buddies with a handy cam. And it was always the buddies with the handy cam got more views and people were more interested in than the stuff that I did. And then on vice versa, of course, the super well produced, ultra professional stuff did as well. So it's interesting. I was in the Uncanny Valley, perhaps.
And you know what? Actually, that's kind of interesting. I think that as like people in our industry, I think that it's sort of just that the dip of the Uncanny Valley is where you cut your teeth. Like it's you kind of have to stay in that area for a while. Like I remember watching like some of the videos that you're specifically speaking about, John,
yeah.
and you were getting there, but you could have gone either direction. I could totally have seen that, and I think that that's where like it's making those mistakes really, like at the end of the day.
So are you saying, do you think this could transfer over to a brand or brand voice perspective, in that you can't just leap over the Uncanny Valley, you have to push through it and feel that pain for a bit?
It's possible. I mean, if we want to circle back, I think that if we're talking about, let's say, Twitter, I don't think they got to where they are. I think partially they created their position.
Yeah.
Because they were sort of first to the party in a lot of senses. But if you forget about that, I think that they didn't get to where they are by like that. Whoever was the first person to sit down with their cell phone and on their Twitter account didn't get it right the first time or the first 100 times. I think that Uncanny Valley is it's just a manifestation of the learning curve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So you almost have to suffer through, like in Twitter's case, I mean, they almost like had to suffer through the period of time where everyone considered it kind of a joke, and there's a lot of people who didn't take it seriously, and it was just kind of like a fun thing. And we saw this with YouTube as well.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, like all the social media as a broader sense, like a lot of brands didn't take it seriously. They didn't want to be on Twitter. They didn't want to be on YouTube because it's like, that's something that's a joke that people just do for fun. And then it took a while before it was taken seriously as an actual, right now, undeniably a cornerstone of our culture, both from a brand's perspective and a consumer's perspective.
Yeah. And I remember specifically 12 years ago, YouTube was for cat videos. And as a producer,
right.
I wasn't going to publish there. And now it's like, where should I publish? Well, YouTube, of course. Like,
yeah, of course.
So pretty interesting. Brandon, what do you think, before we turn over to another topic, to let you button up the back end as the guy who started us off? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I've just been listening because this is a very fascinating conversation. I was actually just thinking about the Uncanny Valley, and I was thinking about all the different like medias I use, like Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube. I would say are maybe on the less polished side of things. But then I start to get into like Netflix and different like video streaming services, and then they're on like the complete opposite end. And what I've always been curious about is whenever someone decides to produce content, how do they even switch from something like YouTube to Instagram to Netflix? Is that even a possible jump to make? And I think it's what you guys are saying. It's a lot of trial and error, and it's kind of a leap of faith. Like, at the end of the day, you kind of got to suffer through all the grit to pop out on the other end. Because I agree, I don't think Wendy's got it right on the first try or the 50th. I think that took him some time.
Huh.
If we're talking about authenticity, right, in brand voice,
your favorite word, yeah.
Yeah, it's. But if we're talking about authenticity in brand voice, like for instance, if we look at that Twitter example, right, it's the trust in that single executor and that single person with the vision to carry it out until they've figured it out.
Yeah.
Right. Like if Wendy's Twitter, if that person sat down in the first week was getting terrible engagement and they decided to go to a big like design by committee type structure, we would never have the Wendy's Twitter that we have now.
Yeah.
Right. So it's establishing that it's trusting that the single voice needs that time to develop. It's consumer centric, it's format specific, and you let it have time to mature.
Huh. I think you guys have both completely hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I feel like maybe large mainstream audiences understand that, subconsciously speaking, when a success story emerges from the murk. It's like everybody knows that like a very small group of people or even an individual had to champion that thing, or maybe that small group of people had to align themselves to such a degree and like combat all that other crap that had to happen, all the naysayers and all the rest of it, and emerge out on the other side like, see, look, we made something that works, and it works freaking great. It's like maybe we subconsciously recognize that as humans, and maybe that's like positive feedback loop towards admiring that brand or that voice even more.
Yeah, I completely agree. And earlier we were also talking about intent, and I think that plays a big part of it too, because as you move towards more polished content with a more refined voice, as long as the brand is clear with their intent and that the user knows that like 5 or 6 or 50 people are working on it, then it comes off as authentic. But as soon as they try to start to hide it, then it gets tougher and tougher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, this is where we end up here leads in really nicely to the second topic, which I think we might have a couple minutes for. But really quick, we've got some audience engagement, and it's been a fascinating discussion that I almost missed some of this. So maybe we'll turn this into a bit of a speed round. Some of the questions here from a dear friend, Andre, who has a pretty interesting creative mind himself and works in a very interesting space. He's in e-commerce. And I think he's really probably seeing a lot of interesting stuff in regards to branding, voice, copywriting, that type of stuff. First, he starts off by saying, Uncanny Valley, the easiest way to ruin a date. Which he probably mentioned as soon as I started to do the graph. It's like, oh yeah, so the x-axis, like, yeah, goodbye. But then he asks, hold on, where can I get this here? Personal posts on LinkedIn, yes or no? Speed round.
No.
Tia says no.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
No.
No? Chris? Brandon?
Stick to Instagram.
I put my dog down today. Hire me? No, thank you.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Okay. So, wait, or are we saying that like more personal post on Facebook and Instagram is kind of okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a definite sense of being good at social media is knowing how they all differ. And there's even like some things that on Instagram, like that you see, and if it's a little bit off of like what we think should be an Instagram thing, everyone's like, go to Facebook, go back to Facebook.
I think especially when an Instagram post belongs on LinkedIn, I'm kind of like,
yeah. So
okay,
LinkedIn's an extreme example of that, I think.
Yeah.
Could you imagine a brand who like almost intentionally got it wrong so much all the time?
I could totally see that working.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Chris,
on LinkedIn, this is where I post my cat pics, right?
Or I love the example of the mother like asking in the comments section of LinkedIn posts like, "How are you doing today, honey?" or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, the culture's just different.
Oh, that's good. Okay. This is maybe not a speed round. I think we're going to get into this question that Andre just mentions next. If authenticity is a brand value, how do you deliver it? So, I think we're just going to touch on that topic as we close out the show. He compares marketing teams to emulating user content as like reality TV. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's something that I think reality TV for sure experiences the uncanny valley, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple other good ones, but the biggest one he mentions ties into our second topic, which I think we'll just touch on. And what usually happens is we say we're going to get to 2 topics. We get into one, and then I mention the second topic, and that's the cue to invite you all back on the show again in the future so we can actually discuss in detail the second topic. But the topic 2 is, and I think we got to a point that ties nicely into this, is how do brands scale? And so I think that maybe speaks to what Chris was mentioning about as you improve your production value, your professionalism, etc., or maybe as you make a transition from YouTube to Netflix. How does a brand scale or operate at scale while keeping a single-minded voice and signaling to consumers that they are competent in how they make moral decisions? And I think that's something that we got to on Wednesday that we maybe didn't get to as much today, but maybe the theory there is when you're trying to market certain things, there are certain moral implications or ethical implications. especially around the holidays, I think is kind of where we were going with that on Wednesday. And I think Brandon mentioned this earlier. Father's Day is unconditional, but Father's Day marketing is extremely conditional. And I think there's a moral distinction between those. And so I'd maybe like to pass it to Tia to just give us a brief bit of insight into your experience with that, because you have worked with some brands at scale. You have worked at the enterprise level. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about your thoughts and what you've seen as being useful in pursuit of success. Tia.
Sure. I mean, especially when you're doing any kind of marketing that relies at all upon like I guess, an appeal to morality. I think it's really important to keep focused on what your company does and what it offers, what the product is. Because I think there's a kind of disconnect whenever I watch something that's, that's talking about what great things they do, and it doesn't have anything to do with their actual product, because it just rings really kind of untrue to me. And it makes me think, if I'm watching this ad or anything that is going on and on about what a great company they are, and I still don't know what product they provide, it makes me think that they don't have anything good to say about the way they actually produce their product.
Yeah.
There's lots of companies that'll do this, like companies that'll produce, for example, like bottled water, and they'll talk about like how they donate to this other company that helps protect the environment. But it's like, well, let's go back to the bottled water thing. Like, you still produce bottled water. You can't pat yourself on the back for doing something good to the environment if you're not talking about how maybe you use sustainable practices in developing the product. It ends up being a lot of like, patting yourself on the back, and it just doesn't ring true. So I think that's the key. I think it's always about going back to what your customers are actually looking for, and what if you do get the final victory of a sale, what they're actually going to get. That's what's going to really resonate. And so if you go back to, talking about how the people behind the product, or maybe ethical business practices that you use within the company itself, I think that's far more effective.
I think I would have to agree with that. I think Chris was mentioning some stuff on Wednesday that might tie in with that. Before we transition out, Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? I think we were talking about CSR a little bit and internal practices in pursuit of, maybe improved moral decision making.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of arguments to be made for the validity of PR and CSR type communications within brand and marketing, and how to separate them and how to integrate them. It's a big challenge, and every brand should be approaching that differently, because what those mean to every brand is different. And Tia hit the nail on the head. It's all about facts, right? Like, you can't just appeal to emotion based on nothing. And I would much rather see some brand come out and say, your dad asked for new sandals, we sell sandals. Like something very, very simple, right? Based in fact, or even storytelling that uses facts, right? To create some emotional appeal. I think it's really great. But at the end of the day, that true storytelling and being able to get that across in an authentic way is really difficult, and it requires that single-minded vision. So the only thing I have to add is actually something that it's a term that I discovered from a guy named Lee Clow. He's the creative director, or not anymore, but he was the creative director for years at Chiat Day, who produced like the infamous 1984 Apple ads. He worked very closely with Apple and directly with Steve Jobs. And he has this term called the Nincompoop Forest, which is ridiculous. But if you have an idea and it makes it out the other end of the Nincompoop Forest unscathed, that means it's a strong idea. That means it's a single-minded voice enough that everybody understands it, that it's powerful enough, it's effective enough, it managed to make it through effectively the design by committee, and you're out on the other end and it's intact. And I think should be always the goal, because the only way to achieve that is to have that single-minded vision in that. And you know, the effectiveness of this guide was the fact that he was the one who produced these narratives, who ensured that the elements of the voice that became the Apple voice were actually strictly his and nobody else's. Like nobody else wrote any of the scripts, despite him being an executive and an owner of this firm. Nobody else wrote any of the scripts other than him. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of stuff is really important, and having that trust in your creative leaders it's hard for a lot of big corporations and companies to give up. It's hard for small entrepreneurs to give up. It's a hard thing to do. There's so much ego involved in it, and I think that you know, we can really take a page out of that.
That's very interesting, and that brings a question to mind. I'm curious, in all of you within your careers, I laid out this proposition on Wednesday, and my thought was that you guys aren't very far apart in age. I think it's a stagger of about 2 to 3 years between the three of you. But my guess is that if you were to compare the professional experiences of 3 individuals separated by 3 years each 20, 30 years ago, and then you were to compare the professional experiences or your experiences with marketing, advertising, messaging, graphic design today, my guess is that Chris has a very different experience from Tia, who has a very different experience from Brandon. Does that sound like an acceptable proposal?
I agree.
I think so. I think so.
Chris? You can say no.
No, I mean, I think things are moving really, really fast. I think that the platforms just change, and there's just so much change that 3 years makes a much bigger difference, I think, now than it has. But to be honest, I think that if you put somebody from 20, 30 years ago that was in a similar level to where we're at right now, and you sort of remove the distraction of the formats of these new things, I think they would actually be more effective at communicating and creating solid ideas that make it out the other end of that Nincompoop Forest.
Yes.
And we would.
Okay, then if that's the case, I have another proposal. We actually went live about 6 minutes behind schedule. Are you guys open to spending about another 6 minutes on the stream?
Sure.
Awesome. If that's the case, then I'd like to suggest we do another quick speed round. I have 2 questions falling out of that for each of you. And then I would like to transition out with the customary Auxesys human outro and learn a little bit more about each of you, even in a condensed amount of time, and who you are outside of work, outside of your day-to-day and the way that you make a living. So first, the speed round. In your positions, have you, 1, felt that your teams, your leaders, your seniority have entrusted you to make those mistakes and take the ball and push it through the uncanny valley? Because it sounds like we're saying that's a necessity. It seems like we're almost in alignment all around the table about that. Is like, you're not just going to put your trust in somebody and they're going to pop you right through the uncanny valley, and now you've got like a fantastic, genuine, super resonating brand. It's like, you got to find that voice and push through that uncanny valley. So question 1, have you found that trust in your senior leadership? And question number 2, have you tasted the victory of taking that ball through the uncanny valley, at least to some degree, through the Nincompoop Forest? Have you carried an idea through the Nincompoop Forest? So maybe we'll start with Brandon. Brandon?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, first off, to answer the first question, I really think it depends on the even the organization, because I think it's kind of dependent on the culture. I think some cultures permit that growth, and some don't. And then the second question is, have I been able to push anything through the Nincompoop Forest? I believe I have. Yeah, I think I have. Maybe once. I don't think that's very common, and I do think that I still am learning, and I still have quite a bit to learn. So I think I have a lot more time to spend in the forest, but I definitely do think I've gotten something on the other side.
And yeah,
All
I can
right. Oh,
jump
Chris.
in. I think
Great.
that I agree totally with Brandon. The answer to the first question is it's all dependent on culture. I think that I'd say smaller business owners might have be more open to that because their entire being of their business in that sense is discovery. Like you're in discovery mode, you're in learning mode, all that stuff, risk taking mode. So it makes a lot more sense. So yeah, totally agree. It's all culture based. As far as pushing through the Uncanny Valley or the Nincompoop Forest, I have one experience that really sticks out in mind, and it's more about the Uncanny Valley thing because you can compress that if that amount of time, if you are like first to the party, let's say. So I worked on a project once where I ran a contest in like a format that had never really been done before, and I contacted the service provider and I was like, hey, I want to do this with your service, and they're like, oh, we've never even thought about doing that. And I did it. It was a very small scale, but it hadn't been done, and it actually, like, as far as kinks and did it feel authentic and was it right? Yes, because it was one of the first attempts at it ever. So, and now it's since I've left, they're running this event, I think semi-annually now. So, and the company's partnered with them really closely on it. So it's been good, but it's a lot easier when you're almost inventing or reinventing a format.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and in my perspective, I think the two questions are completely linked. I think when you have when you have good leadership, which is harder to find than you might think, that stuff really, and you trust in your employees and allow them to work through their own ideas and to bring their own things to the table. I think that makes it a lot easier for the person to produce good work. I'm a big believer in people's visions and, allowing the people who work under you to really like allow those visions to prosper. And I've had both. I've had leaders who definitely fostered that in me, and I've also had leaders who did the opposite and were more, let's say, controlling, and I think they found it harder to give up the job that they had tasked me to do. And I think they're completely linked. I think when you have micromanagement, what ends up happening is you're just trying to please the person who's managing you, and so you really lose sight of what the actual goal of the project was and what the actual idea was, because you're basically just, at some point, you're just like throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that it sticks because you just want to get out at the other side of this project.
Yeah.
So when you have a leader that gives you a certain level of trust and allows you to develop ideas, even if sometimes those ideas don't work, I find that it's just much quicker path to eventual victory.
Mm-hmm. Well, I gotta say I have a great respect, reverence for your lines of work. I dabble myself, and I very much enjoy it. And I often compare it to magic. I think it kind of is a little bit magical to like string 5 words together in a sentence and then shake the whole world. It's like, oh my gosh, right? And I found it very interesting in some of my work experience that in trying to do magic from a creative perspective or from a branding perspective, marketing, what have you, you want to pull rabbits out of hats for people, your clients, your bosses, your team members, or whatever. And I think the really great leaders understand that you're not going to pull a rabbit out every time, or that maybe it's going to take you a while to dig around in that hat before you find the rabbit way in there. And that seems to be very much in alignment with what we're talking, the Uncanny Valley, compressing it, the Nincompoop Forest, all these ideas, and what Tia is saying about trust and true leadership, and their understanding of what that is. So I really got to thank you guys for all of your insight. I would like to still at least get to understand a little bit about you from a human perspective, if you've got 2 more minutes.
Sure.
Awesome. And so maybe we can start with just a quick round table as to what your human title would be, or what you like to do when the making of a living is put aside and it's just Brandon, Tia, or Chris time. Where do your interests go? How do you spend your time? Maybe again, let's start with Brandon.
Awesome. Yeah. So first off, my human title would be the cyclist dude, because I am a Winnipeg local hipster. But in my spare time, I love plants, coffee, and cycling quite a bit too. And hopefully this afternoon I can get out for a spin.
You like plants, eh?
Yeah, you don't say.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, fascinating. Tia?
A lot of my interests, I end up going back to creatives anyway. So I really love illustrating on my spare time. I've done that for a while. I also enjoy just hanging out with some friends. I mean, I just like love going, for drinks with friends. I've missed that dearly during this last few months. This weekend, actually, it just like sounds so nerdy, but like with some of my friends from college, we're just like literally walking around downtown and taking photos and, having fun that way. I think, yeah, I just like, having fun outside in the city with people around me.
Very interesting. We've riffed on this idea before, I think, the difference between art and creative work or creative production. Yeah. And I think that for folks who are engaged in making a living through application of their creativity, that is a tough one, and I've experienced the lines blurred. I think that might be an interesting topic for future shows. So, fascinating. I think hats off to you and your friends for getting out there and making some art in your free time.
Yeah.
And Chris, a little bit about you when you punch the clock. What's going on?
Well, since we brought it up briefly, you know this, John, but I am a big snowboard nerd, and yesterday I was out just putting around on my skateboard, and I really was thinking about how nice it would be to go snowboarding right now. So, I into a lot of that kind of stuff. I just picked up some golf clubs, so I'm getting back into golf. Didn't golf at all last year, and I'm about to book a tee time. So that's that's me. Get outside, get in the sun right now. That's my mode. So
excellent. Well, I think it's a great way to wrap it up, and we'd like to say thanks to all the panelists. You guys have been phenomenal. It's been so interesting speaking with you. I would like to formally invite all of you back onto the show in the future. I'd love to see you all as recurring guests. And to the audience at home, I think that that might happen. So very excited and looking forward to that. As well, a brief message to our audience members at home. If you happen to be a real person and you are interested in taking photos, going skateboarding, going for a bike ride, drinking coffee, or playing a game of golf, you know how to get in touch with us. We'd love to hang. So do that. Maybe there's some stuff down there, buttons you can press. Give it a shot, and we'd love to link up with some new people, both from a professional perspective and from a personal perspective as well. So I thank all of you out there for joining us, and looking forward to the next episode of Circle One. Join us every Fridays at lunch. Thank you very much. Over and out. Enjoy your weekends.